No, I love the concept. I think it's great. I never even thought about that. Like doctors that are doing something on the side. Like, what are some of those? Like some examples of doctors going left instead of right. Like, name a couple that have been on your show.
Oh yeah, so like my first ever episode is something I'm really proud of. This was a physician who is from Atlanta but ended up working in Arizona. She's an OB doctor and always wanted to be a doctor, became an OB doctor, and just realized that, she was trying to have a family, eventually started a family, and just really wasn't happy with the hours, the shifts, the medical malpractice, the litigious nature of being an OB doctor. And her and her husband, who's an anesthesiologist, just said, you know what? Let's just take like some time off and just go travel the world and just, relax and see what happens. So this ended up trying to be like a 3 month to 6 month trip where they were going to go around the world and figure out what's going on. Well, the last time or the last place that they ended up going to was New Zealand. And
You're currently listening to Nii Darko, trauma surgeon and podcast host. I apologize about the teaser there at the end, but I find that his stories are amazing, and I really want you guys to dive deep into this interview and this conversation and listen to the entire thing. And I'm excited. I'm excited about the conversation. So let's get this thing started. Let's get after it. This is Your Superior Self, episode 89, Docs Outside the Box, with trauma surgeon Nii Darko. We must ask, does the world have a sense of who I am? Do my family and friends know who I am and what I truly desire from life? Do my peers and leaders know what I truly want to learn, to work toward, to contribute? If we answer with a no, then clearly we are not being ourselves or speaking up for ourselves. Such silence reveals fear of rejection or an unhealthy level of need to fit in to what they want for us. In this conformist silence, there is nothingness. No sound of life, no pulsing and cracking of thunder of individuality. And that excerpt was taken from the Motivation Manifesto written by New York Times bestselling author Brendon Burchard. And I want to take a quick minute to talk about why I chose that excerpt. And I don't know if you guys have listened to a lot of my collaborative podcasts, like when I go on someone else's show, but I tend to bring up the fact that I was a follower growing up, and I would follow other people's success because that was easier for me to externally look or scan the environment and see who I defined as successful, and then follow their career path or follow what they were doing. And I wasn't taking like an inward depth, like inward dive of who I was, because it scared me. I mean, it still scares me to think about, like, to go inward and really find my likes and dislikes, because I don't know what that's gonna be. Like, I don't know what that's gonna uncover. And I think in order to really be fulfilled, like I talked to Nii Darko in this conversation. And from an early age, he wanted to be a doctor. And I'm envious of that, because I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to be when I was growing up. Like, like the traditional, wanted to be a baseball player, wanted to play sports. You know, I heard a friend say he wanted to be a marine biologist, and I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, I like the beach. Let me try that. And then, like, I never pursued it. And then growing up, it was like, what made the most money? Well, I wanted to be something that was successful in society's eyes. And, my mom is an RN, and I grew up around the hospital, and I was like, all right, so naturally I selected a doctor, a pediatrician to be exact, because I liked kids, and I was good with kids. And when I went to college, that was my degree, that's what I set up to be, and I failed miserably because that wasn't my path. And then so I chose to try a different path that I thought, I like sports. I'll try some, an athletic trainer. And I failed miserably at that, because growing up as an athlete, I loved to be in the game. And I couldn't be the person on the sideline watching. It really messed me up. Like, I hated it. Hated everything about it. And so that's when I quit school altogether and decided to go to my father and ask him for direction. And he pointed me towards the transportation industry. And I've been there ever since. And it's a great living. It's a great thing. But again, I followed someone else's footsteps. And now I'm learning what really makes me tick. What really makes me, like, I have to do an inward dive, like an inward assessment of who I am and what really makes me Trey. And it sounds complicated, and it definitely is. But it's like, I don't think, obviously there are people out there with some crazy jobs that do amazing things that I'm like, oh my God, I can't wait to do that. I can't, I can't imagine doing that, or blah, blah, blah. Like, it's just insane. I don't think the jobs make us. I don't think the jobs, whatever. I think what makes us really happy is like the journey, the journey in life, trying to figure out who we are. Like, that's it. Like, it's not, there is no finish line really. Even if you obtain a job that is a dream job, like, it's going to just turn into a job at one point. Like, I became a locomotive engineer, and I'm very thankful for that, and I love it. And people look at me like, oh my God, you're a locomotive engineer, and that's amazing. But at some point, it just becomes a job. You do it every day, and you get better at it, and it's cool. And next thing you know, you're doing it every day, and 30 years have passed, and you don't look at it the same way. I think that's with everything. And it's what fills you up inside that fulfills you. And what is it? What are your dislikes? What are your likes? What is it that fires you up? What is it what doesn't? And it's just that continuous journey. It's that trying to get better every day. I think that's where it starts, is trying to become a better person, try to win the day. Because you're going to be put in situations that are not favorable. You're going to be put in situations where it's going to test you as a person. I think those tests are what give you momentum and give you confidence to do the next challenge. And I think that's what it's about. It is being able to sit still with yourself and be in your thoughts and your mind, and like really dissect what you've done, what decisions you made, the good and the bad, and like try to figure out why you made those, and go from there. And then not judge yourself too harshly. Forgive yourself. I think it's going on to the next thing. What is the next thing for you? What's the next challenge that you can crush, right? Like, is it going to the gym? Is it taking up cooking? Is it learning a foreign language? What is going to make you well-rounded? And I don't know if I like that word. I don't know if I like that phrase, well-rounded. I think it's just trying to get better. I think that's the thing. I think that's my thing. I think that's what makes me tick, is me trying to get better. Like me getting up at 4 a.m. and going for a run. Me creating a podcast from scratch and creating a community that is supportive and interviewing fantastic guests and creating that community and creating that conversation and being in the conversation. That's my fulfillment. That's my challenge. Being the best dad and trying to be different as a father. Not being so quick to be angry, but listen and trying to understand their point of view. And I know that sounds so millennial, but it's like, my mind is already blown thinking about all the things that I grew up with that society said was right, and it's not. So now I'm trying to take a different perspective from it, and I'm trying to apply it in my life, and where can I start but like the traditional roles as a father. And I try to apply it to my marriage. How can I be a different husband? How can I look at it in a different viewpoint? How can I communicate differently that is effective for our marriage? It's all about the communication. It's all about the being in it, the being in the moment. And I think that communicating like that, honest transparency, that honest communication, being completely transparent is crazy. Like, it's such a important factor in my marriage, is communicating to my wife, like, especially when it's hard to communicate, like, about what you want to talk about. It's not easy, but I think that's how relationships last. I think by building that strong foundation. And when you get away from that, that's when life comes at you fast. And I feel like poorly built foundation houses break. All I'm saying is that there isn't a right way to do something. There's your way, and to find your way, you really gotta start from the inside. And you kind of gotta get away from all the noise, and you gotta get away from basically everyone, and take an inward look about who you are, the choices that you made throughout your life, and look at everything and be able to forgive yourself and to start over and to really understand that life is a beautiful learning opportunity, that all through life we learn. That's why we're here, and to forgive and to love. And you will definitely find your path if you do those things. It's always about getting better. It's not about holding grudges. It's not about being the fastest to the top of the mountain. It's not about being the most successful, being the richest, because they're all different definitions. They're all different philosophies on life. I think it's your ability to find that for yourself and take as much time as it is needed. Because again, your dreams are your dreams, and time does not exist in dreams. And with that said, I will move on to today's guest, Dr. Nii Darko, who is a board-certified general surgeon who is pushing past the limits of the status quo. He hosts Docs Outside the Box and Apple Podcasts Top 100 in Careers, where he highlights stories of doctors doing extraordinary things outside of medicine to inspire other doctors to think outside the box. I love this conversation. I love my flow with Dr. Nii Darko. So without further ado, here is my conversation with the man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Nii Darko. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Tonight, I'm excited to have Nii Darko on the show. Nii, thanks, man. I really want to say thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Appreciate the invite. I'm glad we were able to make this happen.
Yeah, we had a couple of I think it was like rescheduling moments that happened, and I was really excited, and I'm glad that we're finally now get being able to connect.
Yeah, life happens, but that's the best part about podcasting. The best part about having your own show is you kind of make up the rules, and I think we all are on busy schedules, so we made it happen some way, somehow.
Speaking about podcasts, you have your own podcast, up and running. Like, talk to us about that. What's that about?
Yeah, so my podcast is called Docs Outside the Box. Been doing this for about 3 years now, and it's a podcast where literally I'm interviewing ordinary doctors, the typical doctors that you think about working in a hospital or working in a clinic, where I'm highlighting these ordinary doctors who are really thriving in non-traditional fields. So doctors who are on TV, the Sanjay Guptas, any type of medical doctor that you see on TV. How did they get to that role? Doctors who do things in other countries and do medical mission work. How did they get to that point? Doctors who coach other doctors, basically doctors who do non-traditional things. My show is about highlighting those stories and giving actionable tips to my listeners and figuring out how they can get to that point.
So what area of specialty do you work in as a doctor? Like, what is your I guess your field?
Yeah. So my field is I'm board certified as a general surgeon, but I actually practice as a trauma surgeon. So people who get into car accidents, people who get stabbed, people who need surgery in the middle of the night. If you need your appendix out, if you have a gallbladder needs to come out, anything that requires general surgery issues in an emergency setting or some type of traumatic setting, I'm the surgeon who takes care of it.
So how many years of school is that total for you? I mean, like
Oh
what,
man,
25
Nick,
years?
it seems like it, right? For real. But let me see. So that's definitely, 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school. So that's eight already. And then another 5 years of general surgery training. So we're up to 13. And then I did an additional year of trauma fellowship training. So a total of about 14 years to get to this point.
Wow, man. Like,
Yeah.
is is any of that student loans?
What? Of course. Man, I've been collecting student loans since I was 17. I seriously remember the first time I signed my promissory note was at the age of 17. And you just think that when you sign these notes or you sign these letters that basically it goes into the cloud and just disappears.
Mm-hmm.
I never would have thought that the amount that I had taken out from college and then obviously by the time I finished with training would have came up to a total of like $330,000.
Wow, a house,
Crazy.
a house.
Crazy. A house and then some.
I mean, that's insane. Like, how do they
Yeah.
expect us to pay it back? Like, seriously, coming out of school, graduating. I mean, you're basically broke when you come out of school and you graduate. You're doing your residency and all that. I'm sure you're not making the doctor money yet. I mean, it's insane.
No, I mean, to be honest with you, you're less than broke, right? Because I mean, I joke about this, but it's really not that funny actually. But you look at people who are really poor, or people for example, like someone who is homeless, right? Like they have like zero assets, right? Like I would just say, like I have less than what they have if you think about it technically, right? Now, obviously that's I'm being over dramatic, right? Because I have the ability to eventually to make a significant amount of money, so I'm blessed to have that. But in cases of that, I'm not even at zero. I'm less than zero in terms of how much overall net worth I had. And then also to make it worse, my wife, who I met in medical school, we went through the same pathway. So when we got married, we both had a total of almost $700,000 in student loan debt.
Wow.
So it's a major problem right now. It's I think one of the largest issues for millennials right now. And for me, I just feel like if you really want to get the economy going, wouldn't it be better if that money was spent towards buying a house, or purchasing something that can really go into the economy and get the economy going, as opposed to really putting back towards student loans. But it's above my pay grade. I got mine taken care of finally.
Well, congratulations on that, man.
Thank you.
Well, talk about like the training for your position, right? Like you do a lot of surgeries, right? Like, how do you practice doing those? Like, are you doing it on like animals, or how does that work? Like, how do you go in there and practice that, right?
So it's a good question. So the way how training works, the way how you get to a point where you're certified or licensed to practice on your own is you go through what's called the residency. And the old term of residency, or the way how we looked at it, is you spend basically the entire amount of training in a hospital. It was almost like you lived there, and that's where the term residency came from. So I spent 5 years training on different aspects of general surgery at Morehouse School of Medicine in Atlanta, Georgia, at this big hospital called Grady Memorial Hospital. And it's a large hospital that treats the indigent. And what that means is basically patients who did not have enough insurance or didn't have insurance at all, and we took care of them. So these were the most vulnerable of patients. So I developed a special type of relationship with them, because you're practicing, work on people who really need it, And so during that time, I'm training on, doing multiple traumas or multiple surgeries on people who had trauma or who need trauma, evaluation, people who, need certain type of general surgery issues, people who even have neurosurgical issues, you just basically get generalized, surgical training on all aspects of the body. And you kind of focus mainly on the things that you're really going to do. But basically you're kind of being a jack of all trades, master of none, except from the neck and your pelvis. So if the listeners can kind of imaginarily think of me, I'm putting a hand right like below at my neck, and everything below there to right at the pelvis is what I'm responsible for. And kind of everything above that and below that is, other specialties take over. But it's a long drawn out process. You're working 80 hours, sometimes even more per week, for 5 years. And you're trying to get enough knowledge and enough dexterity and enough patient care that you can do this on your own.
But You mentioned 80 hours a week, and I'm sure there are times where you become fatigued. Like, how do you stay game ready? Like, how do you prep yourself for the surgeries? How do you maintain that focus? I know you probably have some type of technology that helps you through the process, but how do you keep that mentality fresh, and how do you keep that intense focus?
It's a good question. I think, if you were to probably ask me and then probably ask like a basketball player or maybe, anybody who's in sports or anybody who does something where there's a high adrenaline phase, I think we probably would have the same type of answer. So what happens is the mundane things, yes, you get tired with those things, writing papers or doing paperwork, doing orders, writing notes on patients. But when it's time to do an actual procedure on a patient, someone gets shot in the chest, someone broke a bunch of ribs, so there's a bunch of blood in their chest, or a spleen needs to be taken out, whether you are on hour 20 or hour 1 or hour 48, it doesn't matter. Like, it's just like that. The adrenaline gets going. You get super hyper focused. And whether the case takes an hour, 45 minutes, or 2 to 3 hours, you're really just focused on getting the task done, making sure that the patient is getting the care that they need in an expeditious and safe manner. So it's kind of like you feel like the entire room goes black and you're just focused on this patient. And I'm sure a basketball player would say the same thing, or a pilot probably says the same thing. And then afterwards, yes, there's this feeling when the adrenaline level kind of decreases and fades, you start to fade yourself. So if you have to write orders afterwards or write notes or maybe you have to, listen to someone tell you about what's going on with what's going on in the ED, you may be starting to fall asleep. But I tell you, when it's on, you're ready to go.
That's amazing. You take care of the nurses, right?
Oh, absolutely. My mother is a nursing assistant. So my mother was a nursing assistant, and anybody who's listening knows, like, nursing assistants, obviously they help nurses, but they oftentimes do the jobs that, even nurses don't want to do. They do a lot of cleaning, a lot of picking up of patients. It's not the most glamorous of positions. And my mother told me at that point, like, you always have to respect the nurses. You always have to respect the nursing assistants. So I've always gone in with like a healthy respect for everybody as a team. And that's something that I'm really proud of. It's something that's never changed, because I always just think of, whether it's a nurse calling me at 2 a.m. or, a janitor who I'm walking by, I always think about, like, what if it's my mother, right? And my mother was able to put a doctor through school on her meager salary. So I always give respect to everybody because, they deserve it.
Yeah. Shout out to all the nurses. My mom and my wife are both RNs.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
My wife is working tonight. Actually, I'm on kid duty, doing this podcast. Daddy daycare, and they're up sleeping. Cross my fingers it stays that way. But I love the nurses. Shout out to you guys. You guys, I know how much work you guys put into it. And I just want to take a moment and acknowledge that. I think you guys are underpaid and for the work that you do and all the stuff you have to put up with. But going back to the surgeries, I know there are a ton of surgeries that are not common, but things that you get, maybe not on a regular basis, but enough where it seems like you can go in there and do it blindfolded. But I'm sure there are procedures that you get very, like, rarely, right? How do you prep for those? Like, is it like watching film and always staying up on things? Like, I'm sure you get, like, every now and then a case and you're like, crap, like, I haven't done this in a while. Like, and now you have to, like, resort back to your training.
Yeah, that's a good question. So that does happen. Particularly with the type of surgery that I do, because I take care of people in an emergent setting. There's only so many different things that happen in an emergent setting. So you get really acclimated, and you kind of get used to doing these surgeries over and over and over again, right? But every now and then there's something that comes through where you have, like you said, that oh crap moment. And the best thing about medicine, the best thing about surgery also, it's literally like a fraternity, like a sorority. What I mean by that, there's always someone that you can lean on and ask for help. And there's also, in our training, we always learn basically kind of bailout procedures, bailout maneuvers. So if there's a situation where someone needs surgery, but they need surgery in a way that I haven't done in a long period of time, obviously there's a book that I can read really quick. There's YouTube that you can read really quick. That rarely happens. But we
But the fact
know
that you do that, that's pretty incredible, right? Like
right.
you're YouTubing it, like, oh shit, let me grab my phone. Hold on, let me YouTube this real quick. And it's like, oh, you got to scroll through, and you're like, oh, not that one, not that one, that one. Okay, there we go.
Right. But remember though, these are also like these aren't like YouTubes of people watching cats. Like these are YouTubes of, you know what I'm saying, like of like actual like surgeons or what have you doing things, right?
Yeah.
That's usually like the last resort. But oftentimes you can phone a friend, you can phone someone who's trained you in the past or a friend of yours and say, "Hey, look, I got this situation. What's your thoughts on this?"
But that's pretty
Right?
powerful, right? I mean,
Oh yeah.
a doctor asking for help, like that's vulnerable. Like being vulnerable enough to say, "Hey, man, like I need some help on this." Like I
Oh
don't
yeah.
think I think. Do you feel like, I mean, you can use that in any situation. Like I feel like a lot of people are too proud to ask for help. Like I think it's important to do that more often. I mean, I feel like we don't know everything, right? You have a text with you at your location of work because you don't know everything in that text, right? Like it's okay to ask for help, you know. And I don't think a lot of people realize that.
Well, I think it's definitely encouraged now, definitely in medicine now. And you'll probably laugh, but the biggest thing I think that's pushed that is the litigious nature of medicine, right?
Mm, mm.
And because, in the past, the generation before me, there was so many medical malpractice claims that went out there. Yes, there was a lot of defensive medicine that grew out of that. And what defensive medicine is you practice medicine in a way, or you order additional tests, or you do things to make sure that you don't get sued later on down the line. And
I,
part of that, go ahead.
I don't mean to cut you off, but I've always imagined like the future of history, or I mean, excuse me, the future of surgeries. Like whenever it's decided to do a surgery, like there's the next thing to happen is lawyers are going to be like involved, right? Like before you do anything, you're going to have to sign a release form. Before, you know what I mean? Just with all there's so many malpractice suits and
Yes.
things of that nature. Like I envision like lawyers being inside of hospitals and signing off and making sure that the doctors and the surgeons are following suit.
Well, I hope it never gets to that point, but I would not be surprised if it got to that point in the future. Let's leave it to you like that. But I think I think there's states that have found a way to kind of make it, kind of even keel, because it allows, there are states that have done rules and have done laws that have made it a lot easier for, patients, if they've been wronged, and actually wronged, to actually seek, retribution for that, or, seek a case and properly, have that case evaluated. And then there's also, states that do the same thing and allow it so that, if there are these frivolous lawsuits, they're thrown out. But there's the majority of states don't actually do that. So I hope we get to that point where there's that equal footing where, things that really need to be, that really need to go to the point where there needs to be a lawsuit. Yes, that's there. But also at the same time, anything that's frivolous needs to be thrown out also. But yeah, I do think that a lot of the vulnerability, the ability to talk to people and ask for help, a lot of that has come from the fact that, hey, look, I better get another opinion on this before I do X, Y, and Z, just to make sure that I'm not doing anything too crazy. I think that that's been a great thing for medicine, because I think that allows us to talk to our colleagues more. That also decreases the competitive spirit, in medicine. I think oftentimes, unlike other fields, I think medicine is still very silo-based. What I do is what I do compared to, a colleague of mine, as opposed to us looking at things from a collective standpoint. What should we do in this situation as opposed to what should I do in that situation? So I think there's been a lot of improvement in medicine in that field, in that respect.
Is medicine like your passion?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Since I was a kid, man, medicine has been my passion. I don't know what it was. I think obviously I grew up watching TV. I'm a kid of the 80s, grew up in New York City. So, watching all the different doctor shows out there, from Trapper John to, Bill Cosby as Heathcliff Huxtable to Doogie Howser, MD. All those different things are things that for me really resonated for me. And the reason why I tell people, I'm like, look, that was a really powerful thing. Like, I remember, like, literally, I grew up in Queens, New York, in Left Rack City. If anybody's familiar with where I grew up, that is literally a stone throws away from Shea Stadium. And I remember in 1986 running out of my parents' balcony where we lived and celebrating because, the Mets had won a championship. That same year, the Giants won the Super Bowl. and obviously the Knicks they weren't that good, but still, like, I was in the mecca of sports at that time. And
Hmm.
for me to kind of still, steer towards medicine or what I perceive to be, medicine and so forth off of TV, it's a really powerful thing.
Mm,
So,
the Mets.
oh yeah.
Um, um, I'm just, I guess I'm kind of obsessed with the idea of finding out what you really are passionate about, like early on in life, right? Because I didn't have that. Like I was more so like a follower growing up. We don't have that instinct of success. We don't know what it is for us. I think that we're always looking for it, but we don't have that instinct to know when it's right around the corner, or even when it hits us. Sometimes we kind of are kind of delusional to it. And I would always looked at other people who were successful and try to mimic what they're trying to do. And now I'm really trying to create it for myself. But for you to be able to say, when I wanted to do this ever since I was a young kid, like that's pretty powerful to me, because like that's like a great it's a great understanding of oneself, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up because I was actually going to say that, you know, I'm going through an interesting phase in my life right now, which is the reason why I started my podcast. So yes, I was very passionate about being a doctor, under, not really completely understanding what a doctor is, right? Who knows what is all entailed in being a doctor at the age of, 9, 10, 11, 12, what have you. And yes, to some people, it's like, wow, like you knew that you wanted to be, a physician at this early age. That's pretty cool. But I actually look at a lot of millennials now. I look at the current, environment right now, and I'm actually a little bit envious because I do feel like, wow, like it's pretty cool to be a young kid right now, to be in your early 20s and not know what you want to do because you have the time now to make mistakes. There's so many different examples of people making mistakes. That whole aura when I was, at that age is you had to go to college, you had to, get your 4-year degree, and you had to go and do X, Y, and Z. And I feel like we've kind of moved past those days, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot of people who are forced to go to school who may not have done well in school, and maybe college was not for them, but they should have been encouraged to go and do something else.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they would have been successful taking a gap year, or maybe taking longer than that, but they went to college, they got student loan debt, and maybe they failed out and they were thought of as quote unquote failures when maybe just college just wasn't for them. They just needed to go out there and get some experience.
Mm.
So I think that this is really a wonderful time in our lives. This is one of the best times in our lives for people, particularly in their 20s, early 20s, 19, so forth, to make mistakes, figure out what they want to do. If they're not passionate or they don't feel like their passion is what, has found them in their, at an early age, that's okay. Like there's so many different examples on YouTube, on podcasts, on TV of people literally quote unquote failing up, to what they really should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And me looking back, I'm like, wow, if I had had the opportunity to do that, I probably would have done something different, right? Because when I grew up, I was into computers. I don't know if you're familiar with a YouTuber. His name is MKBHD.
No, I'm not. I have to look that up though.
Young kid. He's in his early 20s, and he's one of the best YouTube reviewers on YouTube, which is pretty tough. There's a lot of reviewers out there. And I look at him, and I'm like, man, like when I was young, I was all about computers. I had a Commodore 64. I was just that typical nerd.
Mm.
But I got made fun of. Just all the different things that you would think about being a nerd in the 80s and 90s. I kind of succumbed to all those different things. I dropped it and decided that, I wanted to be a physician. But I look at that now and I'm like, wow, like you could make so much money, millions of dollars, thousands of dollars off of making YouTube videos. I look at that and I'm like, wow, like if I had that example when I was younger, I probably would have done something different. Or, you just look at, all these different examples of people who are just literally making mistakes, which is fine. And then, being successful when they finally find what their passion is or find whatever that skill that they can monetize. This is the only time when that could occur. And I think this is a great time.
It's an awesome time. My question to you now is, why not pursue that? Why not?
Yeah.
Why not pursue a side hustle in engineering, something computer engineering or coding or anything like that? Like, why not for you?
It's a good question. Well, that's why I started the podcast, because
Mm.
when I was growing up, also I loved watching Arsenio Hall, right? And I just was really fascinated by actors and actresses and learning about what they did to put into their craft. I was just interested in that type of show. I watched the Johnny Carson show growing up. I watched all those different types of shows. I love talking to people. If you ask my wife or anybody who knew me growing up, I was the type of person who would literally, introduce myself to anybody on the street in New York. And you know how New York is. It's like, get out of here. Like what do you want? And I would just love talking to people. And once I really got serious about being a doctor, I kind of just let those things fall by the wayside. I let my interest in computers and so forth fall by the wayside. So by the time I finished training, I was a full-fledged doctor. I could do things on my own. I kind of realized that, man, like there's a lot of things that I'm really interested in still that I just never got a chance to really explore. And that's when the whole like impetus was like, man, maybe I should start a podcast talking and highlighting the stories of doctors who are doing well in their careers and have decided to go left instead of going right. And doing a podcast requires, kind of knowing some stuff about computers and, doing a podcast and interviewing people. You kind of get to talk to people and meet new people, right? So I got that passion down also. And then also at the same time, it'd be cool to kind of try to figure out a way to kind of monetize this eventually. So that's kind of what the podcast has done for me. It's kind of encompassed all three of those things, all of my passions that I had besides being a physician, and allowed me to put this all together. And, since then, the rest is history.
No, I love the concept. I think it's great. I never even thought about that. Like doctors that are doing something on the side. Like, what are some of those, like some examples of doctors going left instead of right? Like, name a couple that have been on your show.
Oh yeah. So like my first ever episode is something I'm really proud of. This was a physician who is from Atlanta, but ended up working in Arizona. She's an OB doctor and always wanted to be a doctor, became an OB doctor, and just realized that, she was trying to have a family, eventually started a family, and just really wasn't happy with the hours, the shifts, the medical malpractice, the litigious nature of being an OB doctor. And her and her husband, who's an anesthesiologist, just said, you know what, let's just take like some time off and just go travel the world and just, relax and see what happens. So this ended up trying to be like a 3-month to 6-month trip where they were going to go around the world and figure out what's going on. Well, the last place that they ended up going to was New Zealand. And apparently they got a chance to see, I guess, a hospital or meet, someone who was a physician in that area. And they were telling them about all the different advantages. You get to do X, Y, Z, all these different things. And they were like, okay, whatever. Either way, I got to go back to the United States anyway. Well, lo and behold, they ended up deciding to pack up, stop their practice in the United States. And those two moved with their son all the way to New Zealand. And they've been practicing there for the past almost 4 years now. And, obviously that's my first episode, but that's probably still to this day the most highly downloaded episode ever, because people are just fascinated about what the heck it's like to, one, live in New Zealand, two, to be a practicing physician there. Some of the things that she was talking about were just things that we just never expect to hear, from a physician standpoint, like literally she was being forced to take, vacation because, there, lifestyle is a lot more important than it is here. So if she wasn't taking vacations, they're like, what's wrong with you? You're not happy? You depressed? Come on, take your vacations.
But
so that was
I
really
think it's also like the idea of doing something, taking that leap of faith, right? Like I think that's also the attention getter. I think it's also the download getter is people they want to know. It's so crazy. They want to hear if there's like an easy way to overcome fear, and I'm here to tell you that there's not. You got to take that leap of faith, and a lot of the fear that we tell ourselves is not true. Fear builds fear, and it manifests on itself. And the only way you get over it is to do it, right? I mean, it's not. I'm sure it's not. It wasn't an easy move going to New Zealand, right? But she did it. And look, I guarantee if you ask her, like some of the fears that you feared at the very beginning, like, did they come true? I guarantee she'll be like, no, not at all. And I think
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people it hinders us from, going after some of our dreams because of those fears that we create in our own minds, and it's not real.
I agree with you 110% actually. And I think a lot of it has to do with what we have already set up in our mind, the level of uncomfort that we have to go through. There's a YouTube video with Will Smith talking about jumping out of a plane. I don't know if you heard that one, where he talks about how he's getting so psyched up the night before drinking and saying that he's going to go, sky jumping. And then realizes by the time he gets back to his room and he sobers up, he's like, what the heck did I sign myself up for? Right. And it's this fear that he has. And then the next day, he's getting breakfast and he can't eat. He's so nervous. And then he gets up in the plane and he can't eat. He's so nervous. And then he jumps out of the plane. And all of a sudden, it's just this like silence and this, moment of bliss. Right. And he's like, well, why was I nervous in the first place? Right. Like the only point where I should have been nervous is when I jumped out of the plane. But when he actually jumped out of the plane, there was no fear. It was just this moment of bliss. And he says, whether you're religious or not, you can still take, a message from it. But he said, oftentimes on the other side of maximal fear is like the maximum of bliss, right? And I look at it, at first I was like, all right, wait, whatever. But it's actually true. When you should be most fearful is when you'll see the most success, right? And I think you bring up a really good point. Like, yeah, she probably had a lot of fears, but when she decided to go ahead and do that, probably maybe even half of those fears came through. Maybe even less than half came through, right? But I'm sure she is extremely happy with her life and with the choices that she's made.
And he also says something that's pretty interesting. I think this is I don't know if this is a Marine quote or not, but I've heard Will Smith say this. He says, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point. It's true. Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of crazy to hear that, but it makes sense. Like we all want to be successful. We all want to be, live these lives of freedom. We want to be able to do what we want, come as we please, and we want to be able to podcast every day, and we want to be able to work out every day, and we all, but you got to put the work in for that, right? Like you got to make the sacrifices. That's the thing that people don't want to hear. They don't want to hear the hard answer. They don't want to hear about the sacrifices you got to make, the times where you're going to be up late, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, putting in the work, grinding out, and they want to hear about, oh, well, if I just post one video, I could be an overnight sensation, and then I can live the life.
I agree with you there. And I think the key things to get you through those moments for those who are listening is find your why. What is your why? So for me, the question is, well, why did you decide to start a podcast? Why did you decide to become an independent contractor? For those who don't know, I'm no longer employed by a hospital. I now basically sell my services to any type of hospital, which at times can be risky, right? There are times when I probably won't get a gig. But my why is I saw, my colleagues, I saw people who were training me when I was in residency, be very disgruntled with their job, which manifested in yelling at people or treating people, without respect. Particularly people who are divorced, people who may have, certain types of bad relationships with their children. And I just felt as though at that point, if I continued down that pathway, that would have been me. I possibly could have ended up divorced or estranged from my children. So I knew that there needed to be a change in the direction of how I was doing everything. Like I am board certified, I'm trained, I'm an excellent surgeon, but it doesn't mean that I have to do everything in the hospital. I can do other things. I can have other passions outside of the hospital also.
As a surgeon, do you delegate a lot? I mean, I think about, you are a leader in the surgery room. And I kind of think of you as this person who has to delegate a lot of tasks. Like, is it easy for you to delegate? Do you feel like you have to do everything yourself?
No, I have to delegate, particularly in trauma. So trauma basically is organized chaos. So I'm going to take you quickly through what happens in trauma. Let's say someone gets into a car accident. They come in and they're injured, and they're injured pretty bad. Like I need another doctor in the room, particularly an emergency room doctor, to take a look at the head and the airway to make sure that, if they need a breathing tube, or to make sure that, if their airway closes, that there's something there to protect that there. So I need him there. I need nurses to kind of help derobe the patient, get the clothes off. I need them to start an IV in that patient. I need someone to get labs from that patient. I need someone to shoot chest x-rays and other x-rays to make sure that if there are any broken ribs or broken pelvis or broken bones, that there's something that I can do about it. I also need someone to run and get blood for this patient if need be. So there's so many different things that occur to make sure that this patient is going to get the most optimal care, that if I decided to do everything by myself, literally the patient would die. Like literally would die. So in trauma, it's this almost like you feel like you're a maestro in a concert where you're kind of directing everybody in a respectful manner. I need this. Can you do this? And they're giving you, yes, I can do that. And we'll move on. And, it's all of these things that are happening all at the same time, that there's no way that you can do it by yourself. The thing, though, that I wanted to say, though, is physicians in general, though, are really bad delegators, just in general, because we're so used to, particularly in medical school and definitely in residency, doing things on our own, right? It's a very competitive situation. In order for me to get to residency X or to become this type of specialist, I have to make sure that I'm a master on everything, and then I can get into this program. And that requires a certain a certain mentality that is great to becoming a physician. But if you wanted to become an entrepreneur, obviously, we all know, doing everything is just a way to be a bad business person, right? So there are many examples of, of physicians who are just poor delegators, and that doesn't translate well, obviously, outside of the hospital. But in what I do, I kind of feel like I almost have like that natural, training in trauma to kind of take that outside of what I do and make sure that I find a proper team who can help me do things from an entrepreneurial standpoint also.
I love delegation. I love it. I'm very good at it. Have you experienced? You talked about death, right? Like if you don't delegate, if you don't do certain things, it could ultimately lead to death. Have you ever experienced any like near-death experiences with your patients?
Oh yeah, I mean, just the nature of medicine, I have, or the nature of trauma. There are patients who have died, and that's a very tough thing to do, tough thing to undergo. There's a lot of evaluation that occurs on my end. What could I have done better? Could I have, moved the patient to the operating room faster? Could I have, taken out this, or could I have, all these different things that you can imagine that you could go back and get better at, you think about. The best thing about medicine, though, is that there's always a checks and balances. There's something that's called morbidity and mortality report, or M&M report. And after every near death or every patient who dies, there's always this reexamination that's done by the hospital, and a set number of people in the hospital staff who goes back and reviews these cases, and the surgeon is involved. And there's always a way to kind of go back and make sure, okay, what could we have done as a team better? What can surgeon A have done better? What could nurse B have done better? What could we have done as a team to have had a better outcome? So that's kind of built into the process. So that occurs pretty much all the time.
I have become obsessed with like near-death experiences. I'm actually reading a book now. It's called The Dead Saints Chronicles, A Zen Journey Through the Christian Afterlife, written by by David Solomon. And it's like over 100 accounts of like people that have had these near-death experiences. And you're kind of like, I guess, that gatekeeper there, right? Like you're doing these surgeries on patients, and you might lose one or flatline and then come back. And like, I would be so interested in knowing like what's on the other side, man. Like, is there consciousness? Like what's going on over there? Like, right. I mean, have you ever experienced anything like that? Like, have you ever heard that anyone come back and tell their side of the story?
I've had someone who we said, okay, he's dead, and then come back maybe like 3 minutes later. But I never got a chance to ask him, like, do you even remember any of this stuff? Do you know what happened? I never got to that point. But I'm interested in your perspective. Like, what got you so interested in the afterlife or near-death experiences?
So I was listening to Graham Hancock on Joe Rogan, and he is an archaeologist. And his new book just came out. He studied America and the history of America, and I mean, he went deep into it. Like 10,000 BC deep. And he was talking about this guy, his friend. His name is John Anthony West, John and Graham used to take these exhibitions to Egypt, and they would study the history there and the pyramids. And I think it was on some lecture that John was giving, he just for some reason mentioned this guy. He was actually, his name is David Solomon, and he was, him and John were tight, and they're both scientists. And David had cancer, and he could interpret dreams, and it sounds kind of woo woo, but it seriously is interesting to me. He would interpret dreams, and he had cancer, and he had two near death experiences. And he talks about it in his book, but he also goes out and researches this. Like, these guys are like legit researchers. Like, they are, they have two archaeologists. That's all they do is go out and do research, right? So he knows what he's talking about. He does his research, and he gets his facts. Well, I guess I don't know if it's facts, because it's like we don't know if it's true or not. But he gets this information, and he brings back and he puts it in this book, and it's all accounts of people that have had near death experiences. And the interesting thing is like, I don't know what your religious background is, right? But it's not everything in the examples that are given here is nothing that what we're taught in religion. Right. In man-made religion, it's all that God is love and forgiveness. Right. So no matter what you've done in your life and what has happened to you, like, you go up and you ascend into this heavenly state, and you try to reconnect with your spirit that is above us. So there's like two things here, right? So there's this outer greatness, there's this soul out in heaven, and then we're the spirit, and we're trying to get like these earth, he calls it Earth University. So we're trying to get all these experiences, we're trying to get these lessons, and we're trying to take it back to our soul, and we gain experiences through that. And then once we gain enough knowledge from that life, then we come back as something anew, right? So it's very interesting. And he has like 100 examples in here of people dying on like the surgery table, and where they go, and they're like, they come out of their body and they look down, they see their body, and they see everything going on, and then they start floating and going towards the light. And then once they get there, almost every single one of them talks about like a Jesus figure telling them that it's not their time, and they don't want to go back to their bodies. Like, they don't want to. They feel this as soon as they leave their body. They feel like this warmth, this love, this great feeling, and they feel at home when they go and see Jesus, and they don't want to come back to us, right? And he's like, well, your time's not. This is a mistake. You're not supposed to leave. So, and then everybody comes back to their bodies, and then usually they forget about it, but some will remember it, and then it becomes their quest to find out why they're here. So you being in your position, like your role as a doctor, as a surgeon, like that would start paying attention to that.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up, because, I think part of the reason why, if you ask me, and probably if you asked 100 other surgeons the same question, they probably would tell you in a very systematic fashion, what I just told you, where there's a way of we reevaluate things to make sure that we didn't make this mistake X, Y, and Z, is that systemizing of things takes away the emotional component, right? And it allows us to have this little space between the patient and the emotional, and maybe even the supernatural, so to speak, things that we can't control, things that we didn't get training on, and allows us to bring it in a 1 and 0 binary type of way. But obviously, as you know, and as a lot of people know from different countries and different cultures, like, medicine can't explain everything, right? So it's very interesting that you bring that up, because I think there are people out there, particularly physicians, who are, trying to search for that, what are the things that medicine can't explain? And the people who are ready to have that conversation are having that conversation. But there are a lot of other physicians out there, probably I could say myself at one point, who were just like, I'm not ready to have that conversation yet, because that means that I start to have these emotional attachments, right? But I think those emotional attachments ultimately make us better physicians.
Absolutely. I think it's just science, right? Like, science can't, I don't know. I'm a big believer that science can't, like you said, it can't explain everything. But after reading this book, like I feel like I'm more spiritual now than I was before, just because I want to believe that, right? I want to believe that over a lot of the other, religious books that I've read, like the man-made religion, like this right here. It just it feels real. It feels right.
No, I think that's a really good point. I appreciate you sharing that. So,
So before we get into the podcast stuff, like how can people connect with you?
man, people can connect with me in social media just by using the tag at Dr. Nii Darko. So Instagram at Dr. Nii Darko, Facebook the same thing. If you want to email me, just email me at Dr. Nii, that's DRNII at drneedarko.com. And the podcast, you can find it anywhere on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify as Docs Outside the Box.
So going to the podcast, what are your strengths? Like you've created you monetized it, right?
Yes, I have.
What would you say? Like if I was a new podcaster and my goal was to monetize, like what would your advice be?
My advice would be first, find out your why. Why do you want to do the show? Right. The key things is why do you want to do the show? What is it that's going to keep you coming on the show when you feel like it's 2:00 in the morning and you're frustrated and you're reaching out to sponsors and you're not sure exactly why you can't get sponsors or you can't get guests or, you're not getting the traction that you want to get. What is it that is going to keep you coming back? Is it a certain topic? Is it a certain, name that you want to have or whatever it may be? What is pushing you to continue to have this show? The second thing that I think you need to think about also before monetizing is finding out who your avatar is. What that is the perfect person that you want listening to your show. Do you know who he is or who she is? What's their name? How old are they? What books do they read? What church do they go to? Do they go to church? Do they watch ESPN? Do they watch VH1? You need to know all of these different things because that is going to allow you to really literally stop making shows for you and really start making shows for this perfect person, right? And once you do that and you start to get traction, then the easy part after that is when you start approaching companies, you're saying, listen, my show is X, Y, and Z, and this is the type of person that's listening to my show. And it makes it a lot easier also, not only to approach companies, but to find out what kind of companies that you should be approaching because your perfect listener listens to X, Y, and Z. So, for example, Docs Outside the Box. I have medical students. I have pre-medical students listening to the show. I also have doctors who finished training listening to the show. So one of the things that one of the sponsors that I have on my show is a company that sells life insurance and disability insurance to lawyers, doctors, or anybody else who is self-employed at a low cost. Because oftentimes doctors often get these super inflated, insurance policies that they don't need. So this company really focuses on things, on products that are very low cost but very effective. So that's been a very popular sponsor on my show, and we have a really good relationship because I'm very strategic and I know exactly what kind of listeners listening to the show, and I know that they're going to react and work with this type of company. So we've had a very good relationship, right? So the other thing that I think is really important also when looking for sponsorship is to understand that there are different ways of monetizing your podcast. You don't necessarily need to monetize your podcast via having someone specifically put commercials onto your podcast. So do you want me to go into that now or?
Yeah, go ahead right now.
So I think, particularly for people who are coaches, this is really important. I think if you're a coach, you don't necessarily need to have someone advertising on your show to monetize whatever you want to do. You literally, if you're a coach, more than likely you have some type of course or you have some type of product outside of the podcast that you'd like to monetize. So you can talk about that on your podcast. Hey, guys, if you want to learn about podcasting, I have a course called 10 Days to Podcasting, which I do. You have a course called 10 Days to Podcasting. I'm going to be enrolling X, Y, and Z people at X, Y, and Z date. Why don't you go to, www.xyandz.com and check it out or sign up, right? That's one way that you can monetize, particularly if you do coaching on the side. Obviously, the other ways that you can monetize your podcast also is by, putting yourself out there as someone who speaks. And obviously, people who listen now and people who've, been to any event know that when you have someone who comes to an event and they speak, the company pays for them. So that's another way that you can monetize, not specifically your podcast, but also monetize yourself in a fashion that can bring you, to some people, a good amount of money. The other thing, too, that I found really interesting in terms of monetizing is, let me just make sure I got everything. So we talked about having people sponsor your show directly. We've talked about courses. And then we talked about if we talked about a way that you can monetize yourself. Another thing also that's really cool is you can also sell space on your show and basically kind of cross promote with another podcast that's pretty similar. So I've done that with other shows where I said, look, for a nominal fee, and we'll both, keep the prices low. I'll create an advertisement that you can put on your show, and then can you do vice versa? And I've actually had some other podcasts want to pay me like a significant amount to put commercials on my podcast about their show also. I've had to say no to it because it goes back to, what exactly does my perfect listener want to hear? If they're not going to listen to this podcast because it's not in the realm of what they would listen to, then probably this is not going to be a good match. And I ultimately want to give people who are going to be paying customers a good match. So that's really important also.
Do you have like a platform where, like a Patreon account where you can kind of put the some episodes, some I guess higher value stuff there, and allow that your client, I guess not your clients, but your listeners choose if they want to pay to hear it or not? Do you have that set up?
I don't have that, but that is, I think, I didn't mention it yet, but obviously you brought it up. I think that's another way that people really don't think about, but it's a really great opportunity to really monetize your information. So for example, if you're interviewing someone or you're interviewing a special guest and you just want to have some special, if you have like a certain thing that you're covering on your show, and you can not include that in the free portion of your podcast, but create a membership site for that. You see that in Patreon. You also see that obviously with Twitch and people gaming, and they have a certain type of membership, and you can see what they do, with different memberships. I think that's a great opportunity. I don't have that, and I'm actually considering doing that, mainly because I have some Q&As that sometimes I don't put on the show, and I put it as a 5-Minute Friday. And I'm thinking about possibly making that a part of a membership site. And that I think right there is something that a lot of people just bypass and they don't really think and take seriously, but it's a great way to monetize.
What about like paying for your podcast episodes? Do you do that right now?
When you say paying, what do you mean?
Like, is there like a membership site where you can basically put your podcast episodes and then have them pay to, I guess, like a Netflix for your podcast?
I've seen people do that also. I haven't done that also, but I've seen people do that. Other physicians have done that, and they've been very successful, particularly within the pre-med realm. So what I mean by that are podcasts that are really specifically geared towards people who are in pre-medical fields. So it's like podcasts that are helping people with study patterns, making sure they do well on, the medical college admissions test, which is called the MCAT. So if you want to get some additional questions or some additional study tips, sign on to this website and so forth. But I've thought about that. That's a great idea also. It's just basically making your entire website or your podcast monetized, basically. Also
monetize.
Membership type size.
Well, if you have like a niche audience, like, med students that are willing to pay the fees, I mean, and you're getting experience through that episode, like, why not, right? Like, I mean, just write it all, get another student loan.
I mean, at that point, you might as well, right? It's going to be another 10, 15 years to pay back, right?
I know, right? That's awesome. Well, Nii, I want to say thanks for joining us, man. Like, this has been an intense conversation. This has been a valuable conversation. I really do appreciate your time, brother.
Hey, Trey, thank you for having me on the show, man. This was really fun. I'm glad you reached out to me. This was a great episode. Your questions are amazing, and thanks again for having me on the show.
I want to say thank you to Nii Darko for hanging out with us today and being a good dude. Taking the time just to spend time with us is amazing, and thank you. If you guys want to find out more information about the show, you can head over to yoursuperiorself.com, sign up to get on the mailing list so that way I can send you each and every new episode directly to your inbox. If you don't feel like going on the internet, you can text the word superior to 444-999, and that will automatically sign you up for my email list. And if you want to follow me on any social media platform, you can do that by looking me up at Trey Downs, and specifically on Instagram at TDowns80, Twitter at DownsTrey, and Facebook. Music for this podcast was provided by Bryce Alvord of Soho Kings. Thank you, Bryce, for each week providing us with that insane introduction. And if this is your first time listening to the podcast, please leave a rating and a review. It helps me scale the podcast and get new listeners to the show to spread motivation and inspiration. And each week, I just want to say thank you for downloading. Thank you for taking the time. And until next week, I'll talk to you guys later.